the important thing is to know that it's okay to repurpose, it's okay to experiment, and look at your assets. So when I started my business school, I had already written 160 book summaries in the last 20 years. It was the way that people remembered me. I'd write a summary on a leadership book, and people would print them and carry them on airplanes. When I was examining my assets, I thought, well, that's great because all my courses now have book summaries to support the learning. So that's what companies have to do. Exactly the time when they're at the most fragile, I guess I would say, that they do have to spend money on putting together a strategic planning session and deciding what their assets are and what the next move is.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun about all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today's episode is brought to you by Exec HQ, a C-suite fractional firm providing elite executives for your business. Today, Jeff is interviewing Frumi Barr. Frumi is the CEO of Barr Business School, raising the bar for entrepreneurs who are playing to win. She has a bachelor's degree in physical therapy, an MBA, and a PhD in business. She is a serial entrepreneur, having founded or run about 14 different companies in her career. Frumi is also the author of a recent book, A CEO's Secret Weapon: How to Accelerate Success. You can learn more about Frumi at barbusinessschool.com. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Frumi.
Frumi, welcome to the Corporate Couch today.
I'm so eager to sit on your couch.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Yeah. So you and I met, I'm going to say it was
2019, right before the pandemic.
Right before the pandemic. You were the chief customer experience officer, or
the chief scaling officer.
Chief scaling officer for Scholar. Scholar
right.
Was kind of the kind of Fitbit on steroids for dogs. You and John Kennedy, I believe, and Lisa Tomeo, we all got together, and I was in the animal health space then, and it was a big splash. And we're obviously going to talk about Scholar because I think it's an interesting story. But yeah, thank you for coming on today. I'm honored. You have a long storied career and published author, podcaster. Let's start in childhood. Where did you grow up, and what was fun for you growing up?
You know, I'm old, so this is going to be a long one. I grew up in Montreal. And when I was 11, I actually had a little bit of an accident. I was washing my hair, and at the time we had two faucets, hot and cold. And I was doing a mix, and I ended up slicing my hand. And so I ended up in physical therapy. I was 11 years old, and I had a fabulous physical therapist, and that became my goal. So all the way through school, I focused on that was where I wanted to go. And I graduated from McGill University in Montreal with a degree in physical therapy when I was 20 years old.
Wow.
And I loved it. It saved my life. So that's part of my story. It saved my life because I was able to self-diagnose Hodgkin's. And at the time, there was a mononucleosis kind of epidemic, if you like. And because I worked in the hospital, I had this lump in my neck, and I went to the first doctor, and he said, "Oh, it's nothing, go home, it'll be gone in 2 weeks. I think you tore a strap muscle." And I thought, strap muscle? What the heck's a strap muscle? I know all the muscles. So there I am with my Grey's Anatomy book, looking through it. And of course, there was no strap muscle. So I went to the chief of orthopedics because I worked in a hospital. I said, this is what the other doctor said. He said, you're a sweet girl, Frumi. I don't think that's what it was. So he said, I think you should go see the cardiothoracic surgeon. Well, that was up the hill from this guy's office. And I looked at my watch and I said, I think Dr. Shaner's still in his office. Could you call him? I'd like to go straight there. And that's how I went through from doctor to doctor until I had my spleen out, was diagnosed, had radiation therapy. And what that did for me really was make me realize at 24 that life was short.
Right.
And so I've always guided my life based on that premise that if it's not working, you move on.
Right.
So that was the beginning.
Yeah. Wow. So you obviously pivoted at some point. So you were a physical therapist.
Yes.
And was it that moment when you went through this, illness and kind of life is short kind of lightning bolt? Did you pivot at that point professionally, or when was the
Well, within
turning
a
point?
few months of that, I ended up getting a divorce because my husband ran for the hills because he was scared. But we were both 24, so I've long
Right.
since forgiven him, obviously. But it certainly was understandable. But I was invited, the physical therapist happened to go on strike, very unusual. And one of my patients had an office furniture factory, and he invited me to go and look at it. And as I was walking around, I just had all these ideas like, maybe if you did this that way, it would be more efficient. Don't know where that came from, Jeff. It was just kind of a natural thing.
Right.
And he said, okay, Smarty Pants, since you're on strike, why don't you come and work here for a month and see what changes you can implement? And I did. And that was the beginning of my business career.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that strange?
That is phenomenal. That is phenomenal. So, yeah. So, how did you okay, so you work for this client, you
So I worked,
obviously, yeah.
I worked there. I ended up marrying him. There's a pattern here. So, prepare yourself for that. And we ended up moving. It was at the time when there was a lot of political unrest in Quebec. And the Alberta government decided that they didn't want to work with us anymore because we were in Quebec. So we decided to move to Toronto. And the company really couldn't sustain the move. So we ended up in a situation where I bought part of the company. It was a clock manufacturing. It was a clock that had a design patent, and it was really pretty, but it had never been sold yet. And I thought it would probably be really easy to sell these clocks because we had relationships with reps all over the country to go to office furniture places. And so I bought it, and I had a sales rep who said to me, I'm going to visit with Sears on Monday. And I said, well, let me do that. And he said, well, what do you know about sales? And I said, nothing, but it's my company and I have to pay the rent. So I think I should learn something. I don't know what made me so bold at that point. I mean, I was young, and there I went, marched into Sears. And what they said to me was, your clocks are really pretty. I'm going to put them in the sample room and we'll evaluate them in March. It was January, and I'm thinking, rent. I think I need to. So I said to the Sears buyer, what do I need to do to make money in this business? Do you have any good ideas? And he looked at me and said, in the 10 years I've been a buyer, no one has ever asked me that question, but I have a solution. And out of his drawer, he pulled out this picture of a picture clock with a wood frame and a screen printed dial and a quartz movement. He said, can you make these? I said, sure, piece of cake. He said, okay, come back in 2 weeks with 6 samples. So I flew to New York, I picked up some lithographs. I called him within a few days and I said, okay, I'm ready for you. I have samples, but we're going to do a site visit. He said, a site visit? He'd never done that before. So I washed my car because my mother always told me that when you take an important person out, you should have a clean car. And I picked him up and I took him to an Italian rehabilitation center that was a woodworking center. And there were my clocks coming off the conveyor belt. And he looked at me and he said, wow, okay, what's the plan? And I told him what I was going to do, that we would produce them there that year. And then after that, we would move to a larger space and make them ourselves, which is what we did. And I called the largest US clock manufacturer, realizing that that we couldn't buy them in Canada because of the duty, which was 12.7%. So I called up the chief of marketing and I said, I'm going to be in Chicago next week. Do you have time for lunch? And I emerged with bilateral licensing agreement. They sold my beautiful clocks at Bloomingdale's, etc.
Wow.
So I sent them to them in pieces and they sent me their clocks in pieces, those silly clocks with owls with tails that move or whatever.
Right.
And that's how we grew. So I captured Sears business and ShopRite and the catalog business in Canada. And fast forward to the year that 1980, so obviously I'm not 20 anymore. And in 1980, the interest rates went to 21%.
Right.
We think they're high now.
Right.
Imagine going to 21%, right?
Right.
And I had to go to my Sears buyer and say, I've grown so fast, I'm borrowing money from the bank. And if I continue working with you, I'm going to fail. So he looked at me, he was white knuckling, and I said, don't worry, I have a plan. He said, Frumi, you always have a plan. And so I said, here are the three competitors that would probably want to swallow up my company. I had a 15,000 square foot factory. One of them had a 150,000 square foot factory. And within 2 or 3 weeks, that's what we did. We sold the company to them and carried on. In the meantime, next career, the architect who designed my building decided that since I grew my clock company so fast, he had just started his own architectural firm and he wanted to grow as well. He had 3 architects. So within the next 12 years, we grew to 60 architects.
Wow.
And not only did commercial work, but we also did hospitals and government buildings, because when there's a downturn, commercial buildings aren't built and the hospitals start spending money. And so that's how we grew. Guess what? I married him too. See?
You're right. There is a pattern here for me.
There is a pattern. Yeah. Well, you know what? I think that when you're an entrepreneur and you have children, it's really good to be in partnership in some way because you're all devoted to the same thing instead of having conflict. Right. Anyway, there's a good theory behind it. Not that it worked, but it was a good theory at the time. And so we grew the architectural practice and then decided to move to the States because my ex-husband is American. So we moved to Newport Beach. I was not a good fit for Newport Beach because I'm an entrepreneur. I have 4 children plus a bonus son. And, I was the only mom at the games with my computer on my lap, but that's how I did it.
Right.
At first, I was told to just enjoy myself and not worry about being a business partner anymore. That didn't work out too well. And so in the end, I accepted, my dad suggested that a Brazilian firm had a hair product that I might be interested in marketing. It was in Brazil for 50 years. And he thought the US would be a good market for it. So I created a licensing agreement with that company. And frankly, it was the toughest business I ever had because it was a wonderful product. It was for both Black and brown people with loose and tight curls and made them very natural. And it was purportedly a natural product. And so I had trouble finding investors because one set of people didn't want to invest in me and another set of people didn't want to invest in the product. And so I kept on because I really believed in this product. It really changed people's lives. When a child has very tight curls, it's hard to get a comb through. It's very painful. And so this seemed to transform people. And I loved that aspect of it. So I ended up licensing the product to an infomercial producer. And in the infomercial, my hairstylist, unscripted, put his finger in the goop and licked his finger and said, can't do that with a caustic relaxer, can you? And it flew off the shelf.
Wow.
We had a loyalty program and we had 150 subscribers very quickly. And so within the first 6 months, we did 12 million in sales.
Wow.
Now, I was the middle person. I was importing from Brazil and selling it to the infomercial producer. At some point, though, when you have a very disruptive product, everyone's looking to kind of dethrone you. And the infomercial producer really helped with that because he copied the product and we ended up in a class action lawsuit.
Oh, jeez.
So this was, My career has been rather exciting, shall we
Right.
say.
Obviously, had a natural business sense. Not many people go from a physical therapist to doing what you did early on in your career, and obviously we'll talk about what you're doing now
Uh-huh.
and everything in between. But was there something? Did you have a mentor or a role model, or it was just things you did as a child brought you here? What was that for you?
My dad was an entrepreneur, and my mother always believed that she wanted to support his entrepreneurial nature. I think I came by it naturally. I actually believe that the language parents use are a part of what creates entrepreneurs. There are some people who want to be very safe in a corporate job, even though it's not always safe, as we know, since people get let go. But entrepreneurs are just different. And there's a different set of thinking, like taking risks. And ask me later about my next book, because my next book is going to be called Raising a CEO. I have a son who is a CEO, and I don't think that happened by accident.
Been based in Canada, you moved to Newport Beach, you're an outlier, right? Because you're the only probably working female possibly in at your child's games, it sounds like, back in the day. And obviously you've been in U.S. businesses as well as Canadian. Is there any differences? Like, obviously cultures are a little bit different, but I'm just curious. You might be our first guest born in Canada. I'm not sure, but it's possible. So I don't know. I'm curious about if there's what differences you've seen.
I don't think the differences that I've seen are about whether it's Canada or the US. The difference I've seen over time is the understanding that soft skills are important, that culture is important, that understanding the discipline behind growing safely is important. Those are the things that have changed. And I don't think that they're still the same in Canada. It's business that's changed. It's not the countries.
Right.
I think it's the way we deal with business. So just wrapping up that story with that infomercial, I ended up in that class action lawsuit. And what I realized was that he sold more than I imported. So that was a cue that he copied the product.
Wow.
And so insurance paid for that. And I thought I was done with it. And the FDA told me if I ever created another product that burned anybody's scalp, even though it wasn't my product, that they'd throw me in jail. So I was not going to do this again.
Right.
But then I got calls from all over the country from women who told me how much they loved Rio, which was the name of the product. And one woman in specific, Barbara, she was very high in AT&T customer service. And she called me and she said, I found you by calling the Brazilian factory, and you need to do this again. I said, oh no, I'm white, I've got the straightest hair, there's no way I'm doing this again. She said, please listen to me. She said, I lost 265 pounds because of Rio. I said, what? How did you do that? She said, well, 225 pounds was an abusive husband, and the other 40 pounds I lost, and I feel beautiful again, and I need this product. So what I'd like to do is I will move to Newport Beach and be in charge of customer service, and we'll do this together.
Wow.
So we started over. And this time, Debbie Allen was our spokesperson. And we did very well for the first year until my financial backer fell in a skiing accident. And we sold the company to Total Entertainment out of New York right before 9/11. So we never produced another infomercial.
Oh my God.
So,
So Debbie Allen, the famous actress, dancer.
Right.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
He was a spokesperson.
She was in the original Fame, right?
That's
I
right.
believe. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, then what do you do after that, right?
Yeah, right.
So I was asked by the calls. So I had 50 customer service reps, and I was always patching up my phone system because I never expected to need so many. And so at the time, the way phone systems were, I had to keep putting Band-Aids on it. And so I decided to move my 50 reps into a call center where I was resident in the call center, but they had all the right equipment and the ability to roll out during promotions from one call center to another. And when the company was sold, they asked me to become their CFO. So I did. And I love the guys, but I was like the babysitter. The CEO was 24, the CTO was 35. And after 18 months in the BMWs in the parking lot, I thought, you know what? I think it's time for me to move on. And that's when I started coaching. So the year was 2001. I've been doing this for 23 years now. And at first, I didn't want to coach entrepreneurs. I was a burnt out entrepreneur. I thought, I am so done with all this. I'm going to coach people in transition. So the first year I was a business coach, I worked with 9 left-handed men that were between 47 and 52. And why was that the case? Because that vintage of man at the time, they were told when they were young that they shouldn't write with their left hand, that they should write with their right hand. So my theory was they always thought they were different and they always thought that they needed more help. And so I began to say, that's my niche, men between 47 and 52 who are left-handed. And that was pretty funny, but
And did you buy mailing lists with that demographic in mind? And
I wish, right? But what happened was I would get calls all the time from entrepreneurs saying, how did you start your business? How did you grow your business? How did you raise money? And so I was an adjunct coach at a small business development center called Venture Point in Irvine, California, where we prepared hundreds of entrepreneurs with their pitches and their making sure they had all the right legal documents in place, et cetera. And so that's when I really became an entrepreneurial coach. But I graduated from the Hudson Institute of Santa Barbara, which has always been known as the Harvard of coaching schools. And what I learned from Frederick Hudson was that you don't have to do just one thing, that you can always have a portfolio career where you do several things. And there's no shame in that. And so that's me. I have a portfolio career in which I do several things. I've been coaching, as I said, for 23 years. I'm a secret weapon to CEOs. It's not always great to be a secret weapon because it's a secret. I have a confidentiality and I can't even tell you who my CEOs were, but I could tell you there were a lot of them. And then what I realized was that I was a horrible CEO myself. As life has changed and culture has become so important, and understanding growth, and the growth communities like originally Gazelles, now Scale Up, Metronomics, EOS, Entrepreneurs Operating System. There are so many growth systems, but they all basically, different language, same thing. Know your strategy, know how to execute properly, understand cash management, data management, all of those things. And so today, what my portfolio career looks like is I coach CEOs. I step in occasionally as an interim CEO or CFO. I did a turnaround for that call center a few years ago because call centers became kind of extinct when infomercials dropped off. But the call center I was involved in became the back office for universities. And they had, at some point, I stepped in as their interim CFO, and there were 191 employees in 3 different call centers, and we had to kind of re-examine processes and people, which is part of what you do between every stage of growth. I don't know if you use this terminology, but between every stage of growth, there's what we call a valley of death, where you have to re-examine your people and your process.
Right.
And everybody thinks that there's so many huge companies in the US, but there's 28 million companies and 96% of them are under $1 million. Only 17,000 are over 50 million.
Right.
But we always hear about the unicorns, which is why they're called unicorns.
Right.
There's so few of them.
Right.
Because most people just struggle.
Yeah.
So that's the story of growth. When I finally learned what real growth was and what real teamwork was, I have so many certifications in emotional intelligence, in Patrick Lencioni's 5 behaviors of a cohesive team, and DISC, et cetera, and all these components that go into creating an excellent culture. So the pieces now are, I have several pieces to my portfolio career.
Right. No, amazing. So a couple things. So you wrote a book, A CEO's Secret Weapon, and which I have actually read. And I think it's a great book for a CEO as well as people that want to understand how to take that next step to become one, or even to understand your current CEO, what they're doing right or not. But I know Simon Sinek wrote the foreword. So did you get associated with him at some point? I know you ran the Why Institute
I
uh,
did.
for about 5, 6 years. So talk about the book and relationship with
Sure.
Simon Sinek, the Why Institute. I think it's a great story.
Okay, well, before I met Simon, I met John Strzelecki. He wrote several books, The Why Cafe, um, The Big Five for Life, and John is amazing. One of my friends said to me, John Strzelecki is going to be in town. Why don't we do a weekend seminar with him? And it was a couple of $1,000s. And I said, do I need any more certifications? And my friend Susan said, absolutely, you need John's, because he's amazing. And the Big Five for Life is just such a wonderful concept. It's the 5 things you want to do, see, and experience in your life. So when at the end of your life, you feel you've really lived a fulfilled life. So I went to that and I thought, the first day I was just kind of, ho hum, here I am in another one of these things. But I woke up in the middle of the night and I thought, why don't companies do this? Why don't companies talk about their purpose? Why is it all about money? John is brilliant. And so the next day, this is the way my life works. The universe kind of hands me opportunities and I just have to notice them when they show up. And my friend Sonia said to me, when I was telling her this story, she said, well, have you read Simon Sinek's book? And I said, no. And she said, well, I have it here in my purse. So I went and I ordered it right away and I read it and I thought, oh, perfect. I need to know Simon. So I called his office and Kim, his chief of staff, said to me, well, everybody wants to meet Simon. Here's a fellow in San Francisco who actually is doing certifications in Simon's work. The guy's last name was Hitler with 2 T's.
Oh,
And
geez.
I called him and I said, that must be a tough name. And he said, oh, no, it has 2 T's. And I thought, oh, God, please spare me. And so I called Simon's office again. I said, I can't do this. I'm sorry. And besides, given that I just went through John Strzelecki's workshop, I know how to find a why. So I don't need that. But what I need to do is meet Simon. And again, she said, everybody wants to meet Simon. Well, I said, I'm going to come to New York and sit on your desk, but I'm not giving up until I meet Simon. So there we are. Like that was January 17th, March 17th, which I guess was St. Patrick's Day. I met Simon in LA. He was visiting from New York. And, oh, I'm not wearing it today. I usually wear a medallion that he gave me that says Inspire Action on one side, and it has the golden circle on the other side. He
Nice.
gave it to me and I turned it into a necklace, which I usually wear. So when I speak, I always wear that. In any case, a CEO secret weapon, how to accelerate success, is all about using your why as the engine to overcome challenges that CEOs face. And in order to write the book, I interviewed 50 CEOs from around the world. And I asked them if they were lonely at the top, because that's what I thought the book would be about. But what I also asked them what their challenges were. And what I realized was 50 CEOs had different challenges, 40 different challenges. And half of them were lonely at the top, half of them weren't. The ones that weren't were in a peer group like Vistage, or, there's a whole bunch of them. And the ones that were lonely weren't. So out of the book, I came up with this brilliant idea. I called it a CEO's Virtual Roundtable. Then I called it e-Virtual Roundtables. I had 12 coaches who were primed and ready to go. I finally found a technology that would accommodate 8 CEOs at a time. That new technology was called Zoom. The year was 2013. I could even connect with the CEO on LinkedIn at that time. And guess what? No one would turn their camera on. So I was in the hole by 150,000 when I decided, I guess you can quit, because I always thought the only way to fail was to quit, because no one would turn their camera on. And then fast forward to the beginning of the pandemic, when people didn't turn their cameras on, right? But we had no other way to go.
Right.
And there's still people who don't turn their cameras on.
Right.
So that was my biggest failure.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Exec HQ, a C-suite fractional firm providing elite executives for your business. If you're having challenges taking your business to the next level, if you want to augment your leadership team, or prepare your company for increased growth, profitability, and an eventual successful exit, we have seasoned executives from every C-suite position ensuring a perfect fit for your needs and the dynamics of your industry. You will work with senior leaders who like to roll up their sleeves while checking their egos at the door. They can help your business in specific services such as strategic planning, executive leadership coaching, financial management, corporate governance, marketing, sales management, and many other advisory solutions vital to your business success. That's exechq.com. To learn more, go to exechq.com or email Jeff Palacio at jeff.palacio@exechq.com.
Every entrepreneur has to fail sometime, right?
Right, exactly. And so, yeah, I mean, is that your kind of approach to your coaching of CEOs? Because you have had failures and you have seen a lot. I mean, you said you were a terrible CEO, but I mean, obviously you had flashes of brilliance also. I mean, everybody makes mistakes, but yeah. So talk about that journey and how that has helped your coaching of executives.
Well, all my companies were really very successful until they weren't. And that is the way business goes.
Right.
Lots of people have businesses that are successful until, for some reason, like just look at Blockbuster. People who aren't always looking at the trends to see what's new and what's different, right?
Right.
So, I guess I have on my screen here, it doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down, just how many times you get up.
That's right. There you
Right?
go.
That's the
Yeah.
philosophy.
Yeah. Because
But
you're
I
going to
can
get
tell
knocked down.
you are. So with the CEOs that I've coached over the years, such a variety, tech, manufacturing, all kinds of CEOs. I've been very lucky because I've had so many different experiences that I think it all adds up. I always find it interesting when I meet someone who's 35 and, they've got 10 years of experience as a coach. 10 years wasn't enough. I mean, what I've learned by working with people through exit strategies, through succession plans, different levels of management, leadership teams, management teams, etc. What I've learned, especially as I move into this chapter of my life, learning plus experience leads to wisdom, and it's wisdom that I give CEOs. I literally talk CEOs off the ledge. They sometimes tell me, I have no idea what to do. What should I do? And I know as a coach, you're not supposed to tell people what to do, but I usually give an example, or I say, in my experience, or this is something you might consider. I'm always careful how I give advice, but I'll share one story. I have a CEO who started a sort of a venture firm for women, and she started with her own money. She invested in 145 companies, 5 different verticals like fintech and health and wellness, sustainability, etc. And she was planning to expand her business and get other services involved, and decided to go out for venture capital herself. That was at the beginning of 2023, just when valuations went down and interest rate went up. So she was pretty upset. And I said to her, have you ever considered going out to your own population of investors? They love you, they know you, they're satisfied with their investments. Why don't you just share with them that you'd like to look internally before externally? She raised $4 million.
Wow.
Now, of course, she should have thought of that herself, but when you're in the thick of things, you don't always think. And
Right.
sometimes when you verbalize what the issue is and you just start collaborating with another person, that's where the genius comes out.
Right. I think that's great. I think, are you working with, 50-50 mix between male CEOs and female? Or has that changed over the years? I'm curious, since you've had a long, illustrious career in executive coaching.
Years ago, it was the men who would pay for it. because men always felt they deserved it. Women have a lot of different priorities, whether it's putting money in for their children or whatever, a lot of single moms, etc. Were always more careful about investing in coaching. It's changed a little bit, but I still find often it's the women who suggest to their husbands that they need coaches. It goes through cycles.
Yeah.
Last year the balance was more women. This year the balance is 50-50.
Right.
It just changes. And it really depends on who recommends me and what they're trying to accomplish. Often now people, because I have so much experience with scaling, often it's about scaling that they come to me.
Right.
But I would love to share with you my passion project.
Yeah, sure.
Ready?
Yeah,
Okay.
let's talk about it.
Well, during the pandemic, I was in Kansas City. I was in my 21st floor apartment in Commerce Towers, and I got a call from Ned. Ned has 3 companies. One of them is a benefits company. And he called me and he said, Frumi, I don't know what I'm going to do. If I can't shake anybody's hands and I can't meet with anybody in person, I'm going to fail. So what should I do? And he said, and I've got 3 companies. I said, well, what would you like me to do? He said, I want you to teach me everything you know about growth so that I can wash, rinse, and repeat with my 3 companies. And I thought, okay, I'm locked up here with a cat and a dog. Couldn't even take my dog downstairs to the dog place in the basement. So I said, sure, let's do this. So I created courses for Ned. He grew 35.7% that year in spite of the pandemic. So I thought, you know what? I think I've got something here. So what I did was I first put my courses on Kajabi and Teachable and thought, okay, let's sell these courses. They were called Fast and Focused. And nobody bought. I was like a grain of sand on the beach. So then I met one of my colleagues, introduced me to a CEO who was at Techstars here in LA, and he was creating a learning platform in Ukraine. So file that one away, okay?
Right.
So he invited me to a workshop. He told me that he always did these workshops in 6 weeks, but he was condensing it down into 6 days. And I thought, okay, 6 days, I can afford 6 days of workshop. And he kept talking about this fellow named Peter Sage, who started the Sage Business School in the UK. I thought, what a brilliant name for a school. How lucky was he?
Right.
I thought, what would I do with my name? So I thought, okay, how about the Barr Business School, raising the bar for entrepreneurs and leaders?
Yeah.
So I decided to start a school, and I was the only one in that workshop out of 80 people who finished the work in 6 days, which is, as Lisa Tamayo would say, we're beasts. And I was a beast. I just knuckled down and did that. And Charlie, who was one of the marketing people for Sam Cooke's Sanity Desk, what it was called, he said he wanted to work with me. And so in January of 22, I started my school. Well, fast forward to when the war started in Ukraine, Sam's investors pulled out. And so I had to start over again. I had launched the school and then had it to start all over. And that's why it doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down, you just have to get up again. Because I know a lot of people would have quit at that point, but I love this concept. So what the concept is, it's actually in the metaverse. I have a campus in the metaverse, and I have service provider offices. So what I created is an educational hub where education converges with the service providers you need in order to succeed. Because way back in my Rio days, when I wanted to create packaging, I had to look in the yellow pages to find a graphic artist to design my packaging. Today, you can Google, but just because you're on the first page of Google doesn't mean you're good. It just means you can afford to be on the first page of Google.
Right.
So that's what my school is all about. I have 12 courses right now, but now I'm starting to gather other courses. So I have a wonderful collaboration with Socratic Arts. They've been around for 30 years. They've created a course called Halt to Hack, which is a very interactive course where you can actually examine different emails and know which are phishing and be told, like, no, you missed one or you got them all, that kind of thing. They have leadership in conflict, and they have really in-depth cybersecurity courses. So my goal is to have 90% other people's courses. And I've been in an accelerator myself, in an accelerator called Startup Warriors. And so that's my passion project. I feel very excited. And I'm in a very large community of service providers called provisors. There's 9,600 of us across the country. And because it's a community, there's an accountability there. So the service providers that I include in my school are all people I know personally, know, like, and trust. Whether they're tax people or SEO people, you name it, they're there, or they will be.
So you started this course for Ned, and basically then you said, I'm going to monetize it, go to Kajabi and Teachable, which is, natural. I'm familiar with both platforms, but you were just one of many courses out there.
That's right.
And so that's what you said. But then you started working with this person in LA, and he was outsourcing in Ukraine. So what was the big change in terms of being able to monetize that to get more people to get value from your wisdom?
Instead of marketing my courses and sending people to Kajabi, I'm marketing them and sending them to my own school. Plus, in Kajabi, there's no convergence with service providers. So that's really the secret sauce. And one of the ways I'm monetizing it is kind of odd. My dad was a veteran. He was in the first of the Special Forces. It was called the First Special Service Force and affectionately known as the Devil's Brigade. So my dad was one of 400 people out of the 1,800 that left who came back. And so I have a page on my site which honors my dad and offers free courses for veterans and their spouses.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so one of my partnerships is with the Cybersecurity Global Alliance. And they have a veterans page. We are now starting our Google ad program to send people to their veterans page, which will be powered by our Barr Business School. And that's kind of part of the strategy and a give back at the same time.
So any veteran could take all of your courses for free on the website, or just a select few?
They can take the 12 courses that I created.
Yeah, 12. Okay.
And we are about to search for grants to fund the other courses for veterans.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the plan.
That's great.
Yeah.
I know you sold one of your business, the hair product business, right before 9/11, it seemed like.
Yes.
I know one of the things you were doing pre-pandemic and post-pandemic was working with Scholar here in Kansas City.
Yes.
Any similarities between the aftermath of 9/11 from a business perspective and running a business? Even though I know you sold it, but you obviously you were still in the business space versus what happened during the pandemic. And it's obviously two very different disasters, I'll say, or, major life events, but love your opinion of that since you lived through both of them at an executive level.
Let me go back to how I met Lisa. So I met Lisa, we were both judges at a pitch contest, and I began as their mentor, and then I became a co-founder, and I loved Scholar. Scholar was a brilliant product that has an all-in-one collar for companion animals, both cats and dogs. And we realized that we needed to move to the Midwest where people really do care about animals, because Silicon Valley wasn't the right place. In fact, I did a talk at Plug and Play about moving to Silicon Valley in the Midwest, or Silicon, I forget what we call it.
Silicon Prairie.
Yeah, Silicon Prairie, exactly. And it was a big deal. We had the Missouri governor do the cutting the ribbon.
Yeah, I remember.
And it was a really big deal. And so we moved there, we got funding, we had a relationship with Bayer, it was all fabulous. And we were 95% complete when the pandemic started and we couldn't put boots in the ground in China. So very similar to what happened to Copa, which was the second company, hair product infomercial. It was out of our hands. It's, it's one of those things where it doesn't matter what you do, you can't change it. And so Scholar had to pivot, and I'm sure you'll speak to Lisa and she'll tell you the nature of the pivot, but it's all about AI.
Right.
And I'm sure Scholar is going to emerge glorious again.
So what advice do you give CEOs based on those two experiences? I mean, shit happens, right? So, what wisdom do you impart on the CEOs when they face something similar?
Well, many years ago when I was at the Hudson School for Coaching, we learned something called the cycle of renewal. And there's different stages that everybody goes through, both personally and in business. At one point, you're going for it. You know your plan. You're really excited and you're going for it. At another stage, it just gets old. You wake up one morning and say, this sucks. I'm not excited about this anymore. We call that the doldrums, or being out of sync in the business world. What happens usually for people is they run through, like, imagine a globe, and you have going for it, you have the doldrums, then you have an equator where you just change something. You pivot in some small way. You might move to a different city. You might move to a different job, and you're back at it. You're going for it again. But occasionally something pushes us down into cocooning or repurposing, where we just have to re-examine everything and say, are we doing the right thing? Sometimes when we're in cocooning, like in a personal basis, maybe we go through a divorce or we lose a parent or a spouse, and we're just, wanting to sit in a dark room and suck our thumb. In a business, it's kind of the same thing. Sometimes you realize, like Scholar did, well, we can't produce, what are we going to do? Can't produce our collar in China. What are we going to do instead? And so you have to repurpose. The important thing is to know that that's the time that it's okay to repurpose. It's okay to experiment and look at your assets. What are your assets? So when I started my business school, for example, I had already written 160 book summaries in the last 20 years. It was the way that people remembered me. I'd write a summary on a leadership book. And in the old days, people would print them and carry them on airplanes before they put them on their Kindle or read them on their phone.
Right.
And so when I was examining my assets, I thought, well, that's great, because all my courses now have book summaries to support the learning. So when I'm talking about cash management, I might put in a book all about knowing your numbers, or finance for non-financial managers, that kind of thing.
Right.
So that's what companies have to do. And it's at exactly the time when they're like at the most fragile, I guess I would say, that they do have to spend money on putting together a strategic planning session and deciding what their assets are and what the next move is. And that is, my superpower is strategy, as you've seen through my story.
Right.
I always had a strategy to move into the next thing. And I think people should know their strengths.
Yeah.
So, the Gallup poll strength finder?
Yeah.
So critical for people, because as soon as you encounter a speed bump in the road, you should go to your strengths and say, which strength will help me?
And you're more inclined and you'll do better because you're more motivated to use your strengths versus trying to improve a weakness, as you well know. So that's great. Yeah. Well, we're recording here on May 15th, 2024. So it's college graduation time. I like to help recent college graduates with great leaders like yourself advice. So what advice, as they're receiving their diploma, now starting their post-college professional journey, if that includes a job right away versus going to get an MBA or a master's in something, but what advice would you have for them, Frumi, in terms of getting that first job as well as starting their career?
Well, what I would say, 3 words: always be learning, because you never know when later in your life you're going to have to do something different. That I was at a commencement exercise on Friday. My 40-year-old son-in-law graduated. He was a drummer. He didn't finish college. After 10 years, you have to start over. He's very lucky that my daughter has a wonderful position. They were a team and they were able to work together, and he graduated. And at the commencement, he graduated with a cum laude in psychology. The dean talked about the importance of continuing education, because, as she said, she never expected that she would be the dean of a school. But if she wouldn't have had continuous education throughout her career, she wouldn't have found herself on the podium. And I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah.
Because that's the truth. You always have to be learning. I have a degree in physical therapy, as you know, but I got my MBA when I was 50. and I got a PhD in business. And in all that education, I never learned what I teach, because you could be a banker, you could be a lawyer. Nobody ever teaches you how to start, fund, and grow a business.
Right.
And that's what we teach. And that's why I'm passionate about it.
Yeah.
It's for my old self.
Well, I'm excited to ask you this next question, because as somebody progresses, and not everyone, officially becomes a leader with responsibility for people on an org chart, because anybody, as you know, can be a leader. But once you do get that promotion and are responsible for a group of people and setting strategy and, helping with their career and professional development, what advice would you have for them outside of always be learning? Because I know that's one of them. But what other advice would you have for them as they begin their leadership journey?
I would say, listen, understand what motivates everybody. If someone isn't performing, it's either about ability or motivation. Whenever I do a strategic planning session, I don't ask a general question to the whole team. I ask them each to think about the question individually. And then when the team gets together, everybody shares their ideas. I think that's critical for a manager or a leader, to make sure that every voice is heard, because it's so easy for people, especially there's so many disengaged people right now, to just say what he said. And that's not the right way to do it.
Right.
So if you really want to be successful, you have to hear everyone. Jack Stack, in his book, Business is a Contact Sport, when he was the CEO of Smithfield Manufacturing, he was doing a town hall and was talking about the fact that no one was going to get laid off, that they were in a great place, and that they had open books and everybody could see how the company was doing. And the janitor came up to him and said, "You're not correct. I think you need to review that, because every 7 years there's a downturn in trucking and you will be laying people off." And Jack listened to him and went back and changed his plan accordingly. So I don't think leaders should ever doubt that the person on the floor or the person in the front line, that they don't have ideas that they should share. There's so many cases of that, like Turn Your Ship Around. There's lots of leadership books that talk about the importance of asking questions and listening and not knowing it all.
No, I love that answer. Frumi, you have such a great career. What I love is you're still passionate about helping others, and you continually reinvent yourself. So I think you're great. So thank you for coming on the Corporate Couch today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, Jeff.
You just have to love Frumi's energy, and wow, just what a career.
Oh,
I mean,
man.
talk about, again, we see so many different career journeys, but she starts off her career graduating early from McGill University in Canada. It's kind of an Ivy League Canadian school. Graduates early with her physical therapy degree. So she becomes a PT for a number of years, has a major health scare, I think it was Hodgkin's disease, and then navigates into the business world as a CFO, kind of happenstance, because, CFO, CEO,
Just
so
every
many
kind of
different
business,
companies.
every kind of everything.
Yeah, makes a ton of money. Then they get sued, copyright or not copyright, whatever, infringement, patent infringement, whatever it was. Starts another company. I mean, she's just affiliated with Simon Sinek. With a great story about getting to meet Simon or whatever.
Everybody wants to meet Simon.
Everyone. That's what she was told.
She's just told.
Hey, everybody wants to meet him.
Why are you so special? So she just gets on a plane and goes to meet him. I'll sit on your desk.
Yeah, her book, A CEO's Secret Weapon, the foreword is by Simon Sinek, because she started the Why Institute, which is Simon Sinek's big TED Talk, start with why. But yeah, she's so engaging. I mean, like, I hardly had a talk during the interview because she had.
You didn't talk much. You just you threw her
Yeah, she
softball
just
and she
goes,
just took
and
it.
I'm just like, I'm just listening in awe.
It's like she was reading a script, but she wasn't reading a script. It was just so natural and so perfect for her to be explaining all those stories. It was amazing.
Yes. So, Joe, what leadership advice do you want to give our wonderful listening audience.
Yeah, today we're going to go back to that great philosopher Ron Swanson. Ron one time said, I'd wish you the best of luck, but I believe luck is a concept created by the weak to explain their failures.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.